Struggling to communicate with your co-parent? That's why Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger was created. It's a communication tool for all co-parents, but especially those who are in high conflict situations. I always tell co-parents who ask, sign up for Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger as early as possible in your separation and divorce process, because you never know when you're going to need a more robust communication tool that allows you to set boundaries on the communication you have with your co-parent. Are you getting messages that look like War and Peace? It's not a text message. It's the length of a novel. Set the brief chat limitation in the app and keep those messages short and to the point. It's about the kids, right? Keep the focus there. You can also limit the number of messages you receive in a day and other nice a la carte features meant to bring sanity to your life. You deserve that, and your kids do too. Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger in the Apple App Store and soon in the Google Play Store. Go to peacefulparentapp.com for more information. This week on Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast.
When we get in emotionally reactive states, which just means, we get anxious or angry or fearful or resentful or all those, kinds of things, we really lose a lot of capacity. Like we lose the capacity to make good decisions, to have good judgment, to think clearly, to have compassion. We're just kind of debilitated when we're in these states. So, if we're going to make good decisions, we have to be able to get ourselves out of those states. And that's where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness is a very powerful tool.
Welcome to Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast, where we discuss strategies and tips to improve your co-parenting situation, especially if it's high conflict. I'm Bianca Balogh, co-parent, mother, and entrepreneur, creator of Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger app, and believer in turning challenging situations into something positive.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Peaceful Co-Parent. I'm really excited about the topic today, which is mindfulness in co-parenting. We have Elisa Jaffe Holleran joining us to talk about her unique approach to being the best co-parent you can be for your kids and for yourself. Mindfulness is a bit of an abstract idea, but Elisa brings specific, concrete techniques for movement toward a calm, centered, peaceful state so you can make good decisions in co-parenting. Elisa, great to see you. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Bianca. It's really nice to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
What's going on in Illinois?
Well, we are really appreciating the good weather. It's gotten a little cloudy today, but we had a long stretch of cold. So the good thing about living in a climate like this is that when it gets warm, everybody's extremely joyful. So
everyone's in a good mood.
We're all in a good mood. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Nice. So let's dive in and tell us more about your personal experience with co-parenting.
Yeah, so I went through a divorce. It's been quite a few years now, more than 20 actually. And I had a very difficult co-parenting situation. It was extremely painful, and I was anxious and angry and frustrated and resentful and maybe even hateful, I can say. And I really struggled with how to help myself with the situation. So I really started looking for resources for myself. I mean, I was just frustrated with my co-parent. I felt like we just weren't communicating, which of course was not a surprise. It's kind of funny that we think we're going to start communicating once we are divorced, but I was just very frustrated and upset a lot of the time, and just felt like I couldn't get him to cooperate. I couldn't get him to understand the things that I was concerned about. And I just wasn't getting anywhere with him. I was very frustrated and upset. So I started really looking for resources to help myself. And at some point, realized that I couldn't change him, which is a big aha moment, and how I was really making myself miserable by trying. So I realized that in order to help myself, I needed to do something to change my outlook or my attitude toward the situation and the way I reacted to him, because I felt like he was, um, really sucking my power, sucking my joy, and also I felt so disempowered. I felt like he had all the power and I had none, and uh, I was tired of just feeling like he was holding me hostage, essentially. So I had already been studying mindfulness, and I was already a therapist. So I really started using that, those things, or mindfulness in particular, to really help myself work with my own emotional states, and to work with the grief, the anger, the frustration, the anxiety that really is more of a problem than anything else. I also realize that I'm kind of a hothead, by the way, which is it's funny because people who meet me think I'm very calm, and somewhat I am, but I also have a quick trigger. And I realized that when I was getting triggered and I was responding in anger or frustration, that I was really not helping myself. So I turned toward mindfulness to really work with myself, and that's what started turning me around. And eventually, I then created a curriculum and started working with co-parents and teaching a co-parenting curriculum, to help people use these skills also to help themselves.
Yeah, thank you so much for that background and your experience. You mentioned a couple of things, though, the communicating, how you were like, you know, it's no surprise that, hey, we didn't communicate when we were married very well. And so here we are co-parenting and not communicating very well. That makes sense. And then also, you can't change him.
Yeah, it's very hard. We want to, these things, I always think of our external world and our internal world. So we want things in our external world to be okay so that we internally feel okay. And then we try to change things in the external world when we don't feel okay, like we try to change our co-parent. And often that's just very misguided. And certainly when we're acting out of um, emotional reactivity, which I could say more about, which I think is also really important in my approach, we often don't communicate in a way that really helps us.
I definitely want to talk more about emotional reactivity for sure, but just tell us a little bit more about your experience in California, where you lived for 20 years and you really blossomed with your co-parenting approach and your research. And can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I actually am from Illinois, and I moved to California, and had to kind of start my career. I had already been divorced at that point, and my kids were mostly grown up at that point also. But I kind of had to start I had to create a practice for myself and all that sort of thing. And I went to work for an agency, and of course I'd been thinking about this co-parenting stuff a lot because I had been through it. And this co-parenting, or I'm sorry, this agency that I worked for, they taught a co-parenting class, and they had a curriculum that they purchased. And I taught this class using this curriculum. And what I realized using the curriculum was that it really left out all this stuff about how what emotional beings we are, and how to work with emotional states. Because you can tell people, you could say, well, you need to treat this like a business arrangement, and you need to not get hot-headed, and you need to not, but if you don't really have the understanding and the skills and the resources to work with your reactions, you're going to get stuck doing, we're very extremely patterned people. I mean, beings, we're extremely patterned. So if we don't have ways to change those patterns, then we keep doing the same things over and over again. And I really recognize that. So I started developing my own curriculum. I mean, I didn't really set out to do that, but I started adding things to this class that I was teaching. And pretty soon out of that came my own curriculum. And then eventually I set up a private practice there in a psychotherapy center and started teaching this curriculum, and then also wrote a book that's lined up with the curriculum that I taught. So, and then I, just started interfacing with the court system, because often courts will refer people for co-parenting classes when they're in high conflict situations. And the courts were very pleased with what they were hearing from people that were going through my curriculum, who felt really hopeful. When you give people a way to get out of what they're stuck in, even if it's not the way they thought they were going to get out, it just really gives people hope. So that's kind of how things evolved when I was in California. And then I realized too that, wow, I can't really offer this to enough people. So I created an online version of my class then that has been going for quite a long time now.
So let's dive into your unique approach. What's special about how you guide co-parents?
Yeah, so again, I think that my focus on really looking at the emotions of co-parenting and how that plays into how things unfold for us. So the way that I start my program with people that I think is really essential is helping people understand what they really want, and getting very clear about that and setting that as a goal, and keeping that goal in front of them all the time. And mostly what co-parents want, is they want their children to grow up to be happy and healthy and fulfilled in their lives. But then we have emotions, and when we get caught up in all this stuff with co-parenting, our emotions take over and often can lead us in directions, or take us in directions that actually wind up working against our goals, and we don't realize that. We don't realize, because really what we want our kids to be happy and healthy, we also want to have really good connected relationships with them. And it's really common, and I'm sure you know this, that when the choices that we make, the decisions that we make, can actually erode our relationships with our children. And so then what winds up happening is that we're actually working against what we want and what we're hoping to create. So, I think number one, what makes it special is really that strong emphasis on that how important it is to know and to and make a strong decision and commitment to stay focused on that. So that's kind of the first component. And then really being able to realize how our emotions take over, and how we make decisions out of emotionally reactive states. And maybe I could say a little about emotionally reactive states here. An emotionally reactive state is just when we're triggered, and we're very lucky to live in a time where there's been a lot of research about the brain, and how we react emotionally to things. And so when we get in emotionally reactive states, which just means, we get anxious or angry or fearful or resentful or all those, kinds of things, we really lose a lot of capacity. We lose the capacity to make good decisions, to have good judgment, to think clearly, to have compassion, which actually, I think the compassion piece is really important, because if we can't have compassion, we can't even have compassion for our children, not just for, it's not like we could have compassion for our children and not our ex or something, it's like we lose that capacity, period. So We could be screaming at our ex on the phone or something and not having compassion in that moment for what our child is going through, what that means to them, how that's affecting them. We're just kind of debilitated when we're in these states. So, if we're going to make good decisions, we have to be able to get ourselves out of those states. And that's where mindfulness comes in. Mindfulness is a very powerful tool for helping us be able to take space, to to calm down enough that we can stop ourselves, hopefully, from doing the things that are not going to benefit us or benefit our children. And mindfulness is also important as an aside. What is really important to children in terms of their development is for us to be really connected to them. And what that means really is that we need to be present. And mindfulness is completely about presence. It's about just being in the moment, kind of being aware of how we're feeling, how we're thinking, but also to our children or whoever we happen to be with at that moment. So to me, mindfulness is critical in co-parenting, both from just the straight parenting aspect. That's helpful for every parent, to just learn how to be present, but also with co-parenting to get ourselves out of these states that get us into trouble.
Can you talk a little bit about what that would look like? Like, how do you get yourself out of those states? Because, it's hard.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to emphasize something you just said, which is it is really hard to get ourselves out of the state. It's like, how people will say like, oh, don't be so anxious or don't be so upset. Like, okay, yeah, as if I enjoy being upset or anxious. Like, I always say that, emotions are like they come in and just kind of take us over. We don't choose them. They just come. Right. And it's a very powerful experience. And it is very difficult, so I say that up front because I don't want people ever to be mad at themselves for not being able to just, quickly change or make some, be able to change the way they react. It's a process that honestly goes on your whole life. I don't think it ever really ends, but you get better and better at it. But anyway, with mindfulness, the way it looks is mindfulness is practiced as a meditation. So and to me there's mindfulness meditation is one thing, and then just being mindful is another thing. And in my mind, mindfulness meditation is a way of cultivating mindfulness. It's a way of helping yourself be mindful while nothing's going on. You're just sitting and you're kind of and mindfulness is really just being an observer to your own experience. So you're kind of sitting and it's not about being calm. It's not about trying to make yourself calm necessarily. It's really about just watching what's going on from a neutral observer sort of stance. So you're watching yourself. I like to think of it as there's like this little detective or researcher sitting on your shoulder who's neutral, not judging your experience, but just saying, oh, anger is here now. Oh, you're thinking this right now, and when you have that neutral part of you that's watching, it helps you detach a little from the experience. So, and what you want to do is have the experience, the emotion, not completely take over you. That's what gets us in trouble. Is it's like we don't have any control. We're just, we just go, right? So, so practicing meditation, mindfulness meditation, is a way to develop the skill. And then the hope is that it starts generalizing to your life. So that in moments where things get really difficult, you can remember like, oh, mindfulness, like and an example of that is in mindfulness, you start with just paying attention to your breath. and then you kind of watch everything else that arises in your awareness, but you start with the breath, and in everyday life you can do that as well. So in mindfulness, you bring your attention to your breath, and that's something that you can do in an everyday situation. So let's say you're on the phone with your ex and they say something that really triggers you, and you're like, you know, and then, because of practicing mindfulness meditation, you might be able to say, oh, okay, I'm going to bring my attention to my breath right now. And that helps you start to be mindful and to be able to step away a little bit from the experience that you're having, so that you might be able to make a different choice. Because when you're completely taken over by emotion, you really can't make any other choices except those that are patterned. So there's a quote that I really love, which I wrote down so I could read it. And it is, between stimulus and response. So like, between like your ex saying something that triggers you and the way you respond, there is a space. And in that space lies our freedom and power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our happiness. So, it's really about developing being able to take a space so that you can choose to respond differently. And that's what gives us the capacity for growth and happiness.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So it starts with the breath, and then you kind of go from there where you're noticing more about your body, or like what, or your thoughts and
Yeah, all of it. You're noticing your body, your physical sensations. And by the way, emotions really are physical sensations. You feel them in your body. That's how you know they're there. You're noticing your thoughts. Um, and there's all different ways. Once you really start learning about mindfulness, there's all different ways that you can kind of play with it. So I mentioned, like, one thing I like to do is I say, oh, when I get hot-headed and I'm about to blow and say things that I'm going to be sorry for a minute later, I'll 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 really see myself as being that witness, watching myself having this anger. And I'll say in my mind, not out loud, but I'll say, oh, hello, anger. I see you're here again. I remember you. I've seen you many times before. And then I'll bring my attention to the feeling in my body of the anger and just breathe into it, just so all of you said something about awareness being the first step, and awareness is the first step and an essential step. Because awareness, once you have awareness, you have a lot of capacity to do things differently. And sometimes the reaction is too strong and you can't get yourself out of it. But again, I think it's a process where you slowly learn more and more how to interrupt your own patterns and to make choices that are better.
so you mentioned the mindfulness meditation. Would you say that that's required, or like you should be doing that for sure in order to harness this technique as best as possible?
That is such a great question. I think it really helps, but I don't think it's absolutely necessary. And it doesn't have to be the way people might think of it. Like, it's not like you have to have a practice of sitting 30 minutes a morning or something like that. Even a minute of mindfulness practice can be really helpful. Or when you're in the car, bringing your attention to your breath at every red light, or there's a lot of different ways to work at incorporating mindfulness into your life without meditation. I just think it helps. I think it's just a way of really bolstering it, but I wouldn't want that to discourage people from learning about it or trying to use it, because I know that really does. I mean, I think it's committing to a meditation practice. It's a big commitment. but it doesn't have to be as big as you think. I think really, again, a minute or 5 minutes is enough. And even if you don't at all, I think you can still cultivate mindfulness in your life.
Right. You can make it work for your life. And because sometimes a minute or 60 seconds seems like a long time when you're just beginning.
It's totally true. It's totally true. Yeah. But every little bit, I'm really also kind of a proponent of slow change. I think like we do, because I really understand and respect, I have a very strong respect for the patterns that we have, and they change slowly, and we want them to change quickly. But when you're trying to develop like a mindfulness practice or something, I think being compassionate towards yourself and doing what you can and taking it slowly to begin with is a great approach.
So why do you think it's important for parents to really get a handle on these emotions?
I think we want to be the drivers of our own lives. And I think that emotions can drive us. Now, emotions have a purpose. It's not like they're all bad, or, like every emotion, like anger, for instance. Anger can be really problematic if we don't know how to manage it. But the actual, energy of anger, I think, is really important. Because anger is really about justice in my mind. That like there is an injustice being done to me, or there's an injustice being done to my child, and it's this energy that rises up that says no.
Right.
um, and so that's good. But the problem is where we go with it and what happens as a result of it. And often that comes, and we could, spend 3 hours talking about this, but, often that comes from experiences that we had in childhood, the difficult experiences we may have had that make us susceptible to certain kinds of triggers, that make us sensitive or more vulnerable to them, and then, once things start going, once the emotion takes over, it's driving us and we're not driving it, and we're not driving our own lives.
Right.
And we want to drive our own lives. We want to create, we want to create the lives that we want. And and for ourselves, but of course for our children. We want to do the best we can for our children. And so if we don't have understanding and control over our over difficult emotional states, we really do damage to ourselves and to our children.
For sure. Role models that we're role modeling constantly of that control and awareness and all of that. And I do think it's so easy to get carried away with your emotions, and all of a sudden you're not in control anymore. And then that's later you're so regretful. So that can be, and again, like you mentioned, it's not really helping you reach your goals. So having those in the forefront of your mind, helping you to stay on track and is great. So the process gets easier over time. So the practice gets easier. You start small, you make headway.
Right.
How can your approach help in co-parenting and also in other relationships? Is this not just for co-parenting, but you mentioned also with your own children, but I would imagine it extends even beyond that.
Yeah, and that's so true. I feel like the curriculum that I teach is, and I've heard this from many people who have gone through my classes, that it applies to every relationship. It just does. Parenting for sure. And I remember applying some of these things to parenting before I was divorced, because one of my sons was more challenging for me, and I'd lose my temper, and I knew that wasn't a good thing, but I was having trouble controlling it. And so I started working then with mindfulness to just work with those emotional states. So definitely in parenting, because kids are triggering.
Absolutely.
They get the best of us, but then work relationships or other family relationships. These kinds of ways of thinking can really um, be very helpful. And one other component, Bianca, that I didn't mention that I do want to mention because I think it's important is when we start recognizing these emotional states in ourselves and having compassion for ourselves. Compassion is a huge part of the equation for me, both self-compassion and compassion for others. We are doing the best we can. We really are. And when we start watching the ways that our emotions kind of drive us or take us in directions we don't want to go and start working with them, I think we develop more compassion for ourselves, because we see how powerful these emotional states are and that we're not intentionally setting out to hurt anybody or to make bad decisions or whatever. And then that starts extending to our exes even, understanding, because one of the things that I really address in my class is fear, and the way that fear drives a lot, actually fear and grief, but I won't get too much into that right now. But and when we start getting aware of what our fears are, we start actually recognizing that our exes are fearful too, and start having a little more compassion. Like, I know that can be hard for people to even hear, when they're in the throes of really difficult times. But I also think that cultivating compassion for our exes, which does not mean giving in or giving up or liking what they're doing or any of that, but at least having an understanding that what they're doing comes from difficult emotions themselves. It helps us. That also helps us calm down a little bit. It's again not about giving up. It's just about understanding that they're emotional beings as well.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that about the compassion for yourself, and then it starts to grow even for other people. The other thing I was really glad you mentioned was about these emotions. They're so strong and they can be kind of perceived as negative, like anger. And yet they're not really bad. They're just telling us something about how we feel about whatever's happening. We don't really need it to go away per se, but just for it to be managed better. So I really appreciated you clarifying that as well. You mentioned your classes a little bit. Can you tell me a little bit more about what's available for, say, anyone listening who might want to learn more?
Yes, so I have an online class called Freedom Co-Parenting, and it covers all of these topics. It's probably about, depending on how quickly you read and listen, it's a combination of videos and readings. It's about 6 to 8 hours of material, and it goes through all of these topics. And it's not, this class is not virtual. It's just an online class that you go through at your own speed. I offer it both there's two versions of it, basic and court ordered. So many people are ordered, like I said, to take co-parenting classes because of their court situations. So if people are in that situation, they can take the court ordered class, and then it has quizzes and it has a certificate of completion at the end, or you can take it without that. It's the same material, but so either way, just depending on what your situation is. And then also I used to do in-person classes a lot before COVID, and I haven't been doing them, but I am offering a virtual workshop that's a 6-hour workshop on Saturday, July 30th, on mindfulness and co-parenting. So I'm really, really excited about that, because people who go through my classes, one of the things I hear the most when I ask people what was helpful is the mindfulness piece. And, even people who never thought of that before, and certainly were not taking my class for that reason, really understood what a great skill that is to have. I also I wrote a book called An Unexpected Journey, The Road to Power and Wisdom in Divorce Co-Parenting, and that's available as well.
Awesome. What will people get out of the book?
The book is very similar to the class. It's pretty much, the same material. I often recommend that if people take the class that they get the book as well. It's just kind of reviews the material that's in the class. The book is also structured like a workbook. So every chapter has questions and things to think about. And people have told me that co-parents in difficult situations have told me that they keep it on their nightstand, and when they're freaking out, they pick it up and just read a chapter. They're very small, easy chapters, very readable.
What's the future hold for you? Is there anything you're working on developing in the future? Anything that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I tell you, my mind is always working. So I'm working a lot right now on just getting the word out. There are a few counties in California that that really encourage people to take my classes, and because of the great reviews that I get and the way, I just want people to be happy. So, when I see that people are being helped by this material, I want to get the word out. So I'm working a lot on just getting the word out to different court systems, so that courts can recommend to people to take this class.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also just always thinking more and more about how to offer this material in a way that makes sense, that's really helpful to people. So I'm thinking about doing another edition of my book, because I, have had a lot of new insights since then. I also would like to do more Zoom. I'm going to see how this one goes, and I'd like to do more of that, because I think it's really thrilling, that you can reach so many people that way. And also, like you mentioned earlier, I've been in the co-parenting world, which I love. And also I'd like to be able to offer this approach to other people, to people in other kinds of relationships that need that kind of help. So I do a lot of couples work in my psychotherapy practice. And I've been thinking a lot about how to make it more accessible to couples.
How about any other resources that you have found to be helpful for some of your students, other than the ones you mentioned?
Yeah, well, I do think that there's so much out there now about mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, I feel like I'm getting to be kind of an old lady, and I've been interested in this stuff for a long time. And when I was younger, this was very fringe. Like, people, when people talked about mindfulness or these kinds of things, it was like woo woo, like that's woo woo stuff. Now it's mainstream. It's everywhere, and it's just thrilling to me to see that. So there are a lot of resources for mindfulness, a lot of great teachers so books about mindfulness, or like John Kabat-Zinn. There's a lot of different names that are big in mindfulness. John Kabat-Zinn, Jack Kornfield, Tara Brach are great resources for more about mindfulness. And also there are these apps now that have a gazillion guided meditations, like Insight Timer and Calm, and and I think those things can be really, really helpful. I think our minds tend to go to negative places. There's actually one resource. Rick Hansen is somebody that I think is a wonderful teacher. He talks about the brain and the way we have a negativity bias. And so our brains are more attracted to negative experience than positive experience. And so, all these resources like these guided meditations that just get us out, that just help us get us out of our patterns and, help guide us to a different, more, calm or hopeful or positive place, I think can be really, really impactful.
How can people get a hold of you?
Well, my website, elisajaffehalloran.com. It's also, you can get there by divorcedcoparenting.com will get you there. And all of my contact information is there.
Okay.
And I do a lot of blogging and, and I love being contacted. So please contact me. I try to answer my phone when it rings if I'm not working, but
Yeah, that's how I found you was reading one of your blogs.
yeah.
It's been great speaking with you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. You'll have to let me know how the Zoom goes.
Yes, I will definitely. Let's keep in touch for sure. And I'm going to keep listening to your podcasts.
Thanks so much, Elisa.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Peaceful Co-Parenting Podcast. I hope the time was well spent and you got a lot out of the episode. If so, please rate and review the podcast. I would really appreciate it. If you're interested in sending me a feedback message, asking a question, suggesting a podcast topic or guest, or downloading Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger as a tool for better communication with your co-parent, go to peacefulparentapp.com or see the links in the show notes. Have a great week, and as always, stay peaceful.
This episode of Peaceful Co-Parent was brought to you by the Equal Shared Parenting Program. Do you find that you're ever in need of someone to talk to, like a counselor or a therapist? How about legal advice? If you've looked into it, you know these services can add up financially. That's why the Equal Shared Parenting Program exists, to help parents be their healthiest holistic selves. It's a membership program that offers discounted and free services like behavioral health, free tax prep and advice, and access to financial education and credit counseling, all for the low price of $29.99 a month. Learn more about the Equal Shared Parenting Program by going to equalsharedparentingbenefits.org/PCPM. The PCPM stands for Peaceful Co-Parenting Messenger. That's equalsharedparentingbenefits.org/PCPM.